Hey knit friends, Romy Hill here, and I want to talk a little bit about placing beads in your knitting. So I know a lot of us like to put a little bit of bling in the knitting, and beads are a beautiful way to do it. So I'm going to show you two of my favorite methods. One is with a crochet hook, and the other is with Superfloss, which is a product from Oral-B, and it's for basically for people with braces. But I love co-opting things that you can get in the drugstore and using them for knitting. So of course I had to use Superfloss. So one thing I want to say is that this is a different method from when you see a pattern that says string the beads beforehand. I actually like this method a lot better. It doesn't really take any type of planning ahead of time except for having the right beads for your knitting and something to place them with. It's also much easier on your yarn because you're not moving your beads up and down on the yarn as you're knitting along and waiting to place them. And I think these stay put much better when especially when you're knitting with something like a shawl where your gauge is going to be looser. So this is my preferred method, and it's pretty fun. So let me transition over to my hands here. Okay, so I've got my favorite thing here. This is a little sticky bead mat, and I use this to kind of bead wrangle. And this one is from Beadsmith, and I'd say it's probably about 8 to 10 years old, so you can use these forever. Really sticky, and all you have to make sure to do is replace the plastic over the top when you're finished using it. And you can see this is some very well-worn plastic. So I've used this a lot of times, and it's still going really well. So let me take an end of this and show you how sticky this really is. So when you're trying to place a bead, you're just going to be able to spear it right off. If you don't want to use it, you can stick it back on. This is really great. Sometimes when I'm a passenger in the car, I actually stick the other side to the dashboard so that I can bead in the car. So yeah, I'm like a hardcore beader here. So let me push this out of the way a little bit. Okay, here I have two of my favorite types of beads. They're both size 60 seed beads. And what that means is that 6 of the beads will fit into an inch when they're strung. So on this side, we have check beads, and you can see that their holes are smaller than the ones on this side. These are Japanese seed beads. So the other thing that's pretty different about the Japanese and Czech, they're both really, really good quality beads, but you're going to find that the Japanese beads are machined so that they are much more similar to one another. The Czech beads are sometimes you're going to find that in a container of beads, you might be able to stick your crochet hook through one of them, but not any of the others. So always get the Japanese ones if you absolutely have to have the uniform size hole. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you how to place with a crochet hook. And this is my weapon of choice. This is an old Clover #8 steel hook. And this is different. There are two different types of crochet hooks. They're the larger ones. They're A, B, C, D, E. And those are out of any type of material. And then you're going to have the steel hooks, and those are numbered. So the larger the number, the smaller the hook. Now, my #8 steel crochet hook will fit through any of these beads. However, your #8 crochet hook may not, and that is because the sizing refers to the shank of the hook and not the actual hook portion of it. So this hook is actually fairly small, but you may find a #8 that has the same size shank here, but just a different type of hook on the top, and it won't fit. So the best thing to do is make sure that you actually try it. Try sticking it through the bead before you buy it. So that's my suggestion there. Okay, let's place a bead. So you can place beads on either side, And the bead is going to go over both legs of the stitch, so it's going to stay exactly where you put it, which I like a lot. So I'm just going to take my hook here and spear one of my beads. Just going to kind of move this aside. Okay, so I have my hook. Here's the stitch that I want to bead. I'm going to insert my hook through that stitch, and then I'm going to put a little bit of, I'm going to pull a little bit, some pressure there, and then I'm going to slip my bead over that stitch. I'm going to pull the stitch off the needle and pull the bead down. And you can see here that I've split my stitch a little bit. And that is one of the issues sometimes that you're going to have when you place beads with a crochet hook. So that's okay as long as you get your needle through the entire stitch, and those little threads there just all go back to your yarn so you don't have a split stitch. So I'm going to knit the stitch now, and I'm knitting it because we are on the knitted side of the material. So wherever I am placing my bead, I'm going to make sure that it's in the same pattern so that I'm not going to knit on a purl side or purl on a knit side. So here is my bead here, and you can see on the purl side, you still see that bead. So that is because it's basically sitting in the fabric. It doesn't really pop up to the wrong side or the right side. So I'm just going to show you what it looks like on the purl side. So I'm just going to purl a few stitches. It's basically going to look the same. Of course, it'll be in a different row, but because the bead sits between basically between the front and the back in the middle of the fabric, you're not going to see any difference at all. So you can't actually tell in your finished object whether you've placed it on the purl or knit side. So here I have my crochet hook again. I'm just going to put it through my stitch and kind of put a little tension there so that the hook hooks the stitch. Now I'm slipping that bead down over the top of the stitch, and I'm going to pull it off the needle and pull the bead down. And I have actually split my yarn again, but no worries. I'm just going to be sure to put the whole thing back onto my needle so that I can purl the stitch. And there we go with that. Okay, so I have two beads placed here, and now I am going to talk to you about Superfloss. So let me take my little sticky mat over here so I don't get everything stuck to it. This is what Superfloss looks like in the package. So I've been known to hoard it a little bit, so the package may look a little bit different now. I am not sure. This is part of my Superfloss hoard. So this is what Superfloss looks like. Okay, so up on one end of it, you have this really stiff part. So it's about 3 inches long here. It's very stiff. Below that, you have a really fluffy part. You can see how fuzzy that is there. And then underneath that fuzzy part, you have a longer, just plain piece of dental floss. So I love these things and I love to travel with them. And what I do is that I string my beads onto my Superfloss. So I've taken my, like I string them onto the hard end, and then on the very end of just the plain floss, I take that last bead and knot it within the floss, and that helps all my other beads just stay on there. And I can string a whole bunch of beads on there, and then when I'm ready to, I can just place them. So this is really great for travel, for instance. If you don't want to take your sticky bead mat with you, these will not come off. unless you really work at it. So up here you can see I've just sort of gotten my beads ready here to place them. They're on the really fluffy part of the super floss, and they stay there pretty well. I can move them up or down. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to place a bead now. So this is the hard end of the super floss here, and I am going to put that through the stitch that I want to place my bead on. So at the end's just going to go straight through. Now I'm going to bend it back over on itself. So here is the end of my hard piece of the super floss. And then this right here, this is the fluffy part, and this is the other part of the stiff end. Now I'm going to move a bead up from the fluffy part of the super floss so that it goes over both the end and over the strand. So there are two lengths of super floss right through here, right there, because it's bent. And that's what it looks like. There's a little interlocking stitch with the super floss. So I'm going to pull my stitch off. Now I'm going to move that bead down over the stitch and replace my stitch on the needle. And you probably have noticed that it's much more difficult to split a stitch using the Superfloss method. I did say it's more difficult, right? Yeah. You don't split stitches with Superfloss. So that's fantastic if you want to do like you want to be placing beads on worsted weight, for instance. And I have actually placed size 6-0 beads on to worsted weight, and they work great with the Superfloss method. So let me just, it's getting away from me here. I'm just going to place another bead for you. So you can just see this again. Let me do one more or two more stitches, I think. Okay, so once again, much more difficult to split a stitch if you're using Superfloss. Okay, so here is the end of my Superfloss. Going to put it right through the center of my stitch, and I'm going to bend that over. Okay, so here's the end of my super floss. Here's the long part of it. I'm going to push that bead up, and it's going to go over the end of the super floss. So I have the double super floss right through the middle of the bead. Now I'm going to pull that stitch off of my needle and put my bead down over the top of the stitch, replace the stitch on my needle, take out the super floss, and then I am going to knit that stitch now. Okay, so let's get to the end here. Then we can kind of take a look at all the beads, and you'll see all the bling on the knitting. So here we go. You can see they all look like basically the same, even though they were placed on different sides. So these are silver lined beads. Let's go back here. I'll talk a little bit about beads. These are silver lined beads, and there are all sorts of different types of beautiful beads. I always stay with Japanese or Czech seed beads because they're the highest quality. And I love silver lined beads, but the silver lined beads do tend to tarnish sometimes. So you want to be aware that if you have something really like some light color, maybe like a bride shawl, for instance, you might not want to use the silver lined beads because they can tarnish a little bit and you get a little bit of gray under there. There's another type of finish called an aurora borealis, and that looks kind of opalescent and beautiful. It's so much fun to collect beads. So I just have this giant stash of beads and, inexpensive, easy to collect. They're small. So I kind of go, I just go for whatever looks interesting and I kind of try it out. One thing you want to be careful of is some of the red and orange beads. They can be not color fast. So, in other words, um, if you wash them, the color may drain out. So, you definitely want to swatch beforehand and just see what your bead is going to look like on your knitting. So, make sure to stay away from crystal. Crystal can cut, as can metal. So, crystal and metal, definitely be really careful about those. And other than that, I mean, just have fun. There are so many amazing beads out there. Just play with them and, see what they look like in your knitting. So, thank you so much for joining me. And it's been a real pleasure. And I hope to see you around social media. Take care. Bye bye.